It seems to be broadcasting. So let's see.
It says we're in the show.
Yeah, it says that, but we have to check if we can see ourselves. Do we? Good afternoon, everybody. We just jumped on the live. I don't know if it's yet working. We're just going to check quickly. Dash of Cyber. Is that thing live? Yes. No, maybe it's going to start soon. Yeah, I guess there's a little bit of lag between the live of LinkedIn. And yeah, it started. We're live. So, hi, everybody.
Hey, Alex.
It just so people, I'm gonna tell you, all right. I jumped into the live. It's my session on the StreamYard thing that we used to stream, and I was stuck in a meeting just up to a few minutes because we had to handle something at work, obviously. And they were waiting to that stuff. I went on the interface. I didn't log in. It was all crappy. My battery was not charged, and it was like, what? It's 2 minutes before live. And here we go. So welcome, Brad. Welcome, Rod. Everybody know Brad and Rod and myself, but people are not used to on Dash of Cyber to have Dennis on the call.
Hey, guys.
Yes.
Hey, Dennis, welcome. Glad you're here.
Hey, Dennis.
Glad to be here.
So, Rod, you sent us some kind of documentation in the back end about the topic we're going to cover today. So what are we going to speak about already?
This is all Dennis is doing. So Dennis was posting a bunch of stuff on Zero Trust. And we did a little banter back and forth on the marketing hype that's in the market versus the reality of what Zero Trust is, whether it's a product or whether it's a framework and so we thought it'd be a good thing to make that our first Dash of Cyber for the year is bring Dennis in and talk to people about Zero Trust. I think we all believe in the concept of Zero Trust. What we're concerned about is it's being sold as a product. And not highlighting a lot of the work that has to go on behind it, which is good work that you should do anyways. So
and in some cases, I would argue we're already doing it. We just don't know it, or we don't realize it. I think we know it. We just don't realize it.
You haven't officially named it yet.
Yeah, we didn't give it a name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, I'll give Dennis a chance to chime in because I believe you implemented it on your side as well too, Dennis, in your organization as you've been moving forward. And that kind of sparked your LinkedIn post that I chimed into.
Yeah, it's a little bit different angle because, of course, I'm an OEM vendor now, right? So it's a different angle, right? Because I'm not going to go out there and say, I like what you said, Rod, about earlier before. I think even on LinkedIn as well, and I think everyone would agree that Zero Trust is not a product. But of course, the second you say that, you go to some CIO who's very busy and very knowledgeable, and the first thing he's going to Google after talking like to you, Alexandre, or Brad, or whatever, it's like Zero Trust product. Because what else are you going to do? And that's just the way the world works. When my dentist tells me to brush better, I look, I Google for I need a better toothbrush. Like that's just the way.
I like that analogy.
Right?
It's good. It's good.
Yeah, but I guess how do you guys want to do this? I can go into the kind of stuff that we do, and that can maybe feed some discussion into what you guys see on the architectural, enterprise level, if that would work. Or do you want to maybe try to like us to define Zero Trust a little bit first, and we go down that rabbit hole? What do you guys want to do?
Yeah, I think. I'll jump in. I think defining it is good because when and I love the picture, in NIST 800-207 that Alexandre helped to write, which is awesome. But when I look at that picture, I look at that and I go, man, that's a great picture. But the key word in the picture, it's figure 2 on page, I think it's like 18 or something like that, it says it's the logical components, right? So that word logical implies something. It implies that these are not necessarily like a physical device or a product. They're something that they may be, but they may be something you do, in real space, not cyberspace.
If it helps, I can read the definition as defined. And
yes,
you can go from there.
feel like it's Sunday morning. I'm in church. Like, who's the scripture on?
Let's have a reading from the book of Zero Trust, Rod.
Yes.
So Zero Trust is a security framework requiring all users, whether in or outside the organization, to be authenticated, authorized, and continuously validated for security configurations and posture before granted or keeping access to applications and data. It assumes that there's no traditional network edge. Everybody's untrusted. Everything has to be authenticated, and it's a constant process, right? So you're constantly checking. You're checking for invalids. You're constantly checking to see if the person still needs access, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a continuous, not a set it and forget it.
Yeah. From the NIST standpoint, you got that data plane and control plane, and that's all along the way validating the authenticity of everything, because not only users but device and everything. And this is based on so-called attributes, which are supposed to be used as value to make sure that we speak to, or the device speak to, user or device that is supposed to be claiming who it is. So, and that's when I did a workshop, with NIST at the beginning of the definition of it, which was not yet walking the walk. But yeah, that's the idea of it. But when it comes to implementation, as Brad was saying, we have some of it, and we have some. It's like a Lego kind of brick stuff that we built together, but we don't have all of it. And at some point, I don't know about you guys, but do you think we can apply that on the whole environment? And maybe Dennis is gonna kick on that and make it like fully zero trust, or because I know, I'm like offering services and we speak about zero trust network access. So we place the network access control under the zero trust principle, but it doesn't mean that the full organization is zero trust. So maybe that's going to be a discussion of today. Can we be fully zero trust? Is it meaningful? Can we implement it? What's the extent of it? I mean, let's go on that. I don't know, Rod, if you want to add something, or Dennis.
No, I think that's exactly it. Is it the entire organization? Is it part of the organization? Is it a continuum where you kind of do it in bite-sized chunks? What is it? But we know that vendors are saying stuff like you don't need a VPN anymore, right? Right? It's easy to implement, and it unleashes agility and all kinds of stuff that really it was never meant to do. And so it's really those types of things that kind of put people down the wrong path. And I thought this would be a great conversation. So that's kind of where we're at.
I kind of look at it from the angle where we're never going to be completely zero trust. And I'll back that up with an explanation, right? Because we're trying not to be in the world of fantastical claims, right? And awesome fashion accessories, right? So so the point, when I was making my post originally was, so we have a variety of countermeasures that we need to implement at the coding level, and that kind of started with very cursory kind of protections, and then we'd realize those weren't good enough, and then we'd start getting further and further in the kernel until we realized we couldn't even trust the kernel in many cases, that Windows itself was telling us lies, and so it's like being handed a fake NIST, that has make all your passwords lowercase letters and no more than 10 characters, so something like that, and you're just like, that's a lie, there's no way that's a real NIST, so what happened was that we came to the realization that we're now entering the world of secure coding, and coding in a much more complicated fashion than your typical junior intern code. Although some intern code is better than supposedly senior engineer code, but that's a different story.
That's my coding. That's my coding skill set right there. Junior coding. I can.
Nice. But it adds for us. As we're getting farther and farther, it adds latency to our development cycles to figure out all the ways that Windows can possibly break us, or other things happening, or adding on extra. For instance, we just had to add on RSA signed communications, because we realized that to the zero trust model, some folks we had, their network switches were compromised and mucking with our data. So there's things like that are constantly going on, and we're never going to get rid of that because we're still arguing about IoT devices with widely accessible exploits. So for me, I'm like, okay, so we're never going to completely, satisfy Alexandre's diagram, however awesome it is, because, we're going to have this awesome setup, maybe like an AD enclave or something, and then right next to it is going to be like the NAS device, which has 7 publicly accessible, Metasploit exploits there. And it just totally broke our whole model, like because it has unfettered access because of backup software to whatever it wants, So I'll stop talking about it.
No,
that's
go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, Dennis did comment on the chat that, how can you zero trust like when you're in the cloud and you do not control the layer 1 and 2? And as you say, like you spoke about the system that we cannot even trust the kernel. So what about the stack that we cannot even touch? So that's the challenge there. Building zero trust in an environment that is hostile, after all. So basically, can we what can business do from there? Like assume compromise that that I'm the guy that connected equal hacked. So what do we do?
Yeah, cyber resilience seems to be the watchword, right? And you guys are more in that world than me, because now my life has been consumed by this hardened ICBM silo, that's called my product. So I don't get to dabble in the world of architectural diagrams anymore. I'm worried about kernel, bugs and stuff like that, So I mean, what do you guys do on the the network segmentation, right? IAM. What do you guys do beyond that to kind of implement zero trust?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of areas you think about it, and I like to we always talk when we do our conversations to get to like a practical example. And so if you work for the government or whatever government in the world, right, you're issued an ID card, and that ID card, if they've implemented PKI, right, that's how you access the systems. And so in many cases, a lot of folks, if they, depending on who they work for, if any employer, right, if they issue an ID card that gives you that PKI and that's how you access the network, stuff like that, think smart cards, that kind of thing, right? We already see that out there. That just gets folded into a piece of the zero trust architecture, right? And so obviously business can do that. Obviously, small and mid-sized businesses probably aren't doing that, but they are doing effectively some of that ID management. Now, it may not be as elegant as a PKI system, but it is something where they have, getting into the construct of least privilege and all that stuff. So they're already doing it. They just don't see it in the sense of zero trust. They think of it as, that's Rod logging onto the network to do some printing. Well, it gets back, when you get into the back end of, if you're running, say, Kerberos, right, and you get your ticket granting ticket. I'm totally nerding out right now. You can go to the ticket granting server and you do all these things. It's great, anyways. But and then you get access to that. But all of that happens behind the scenes, right? You log in with single sign-on, and that single sign-on, in theory, right, is your gate in from an ID management perspective into something we might call, a policy engine or a policy administrator, which effectively, depending on what it is, right, the product is, it could be an Active Directory, right? So it just depends, right? So like we said up front, right, we're doing a lot of this already. We just haven't, sat down. It's like if you were to do, say, a zero trust audit on an organization, you would find a lot of the components already there. You just haven't labeled them that way.
I think the piece that's missing, sorry to cut you off, Alexander, is
Go ahead.
Is the process and the rigor in the process, right? So it's Dennis needs access to the sales database today, so we give him access to the sales database, but we never relinquish that access. We never clean it out, right? And so that rigor of, you can't really have a real zero trust infrastructure if you don't constantly revisit, right? And so what happens inevitably, and that's where I question people selling the software and selling all these zero trust layers on top, is if you don't have that base done, all you're doing is finding a different way to perpetuate the same problem you had all the time, right? If you never looked at Dennis's access month to month, week to week, and said he needs this, he doesn't need this, and Sheila doesn't need to print, and nobody should be on the e-commerce servers, and blah, 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 blah. If you don't do any of that, then you can implement as many solutions as you want. You're still going to be screwed. And so that's where I question kind of the vendors and the sales, and they sell a solution that they paint as quick. But in reality, a lot of companies have to do a lot of work to make it work properly, right? And to Alexander's point at the beginning, how do you start? Well, you can't do a whole company like that. So you got to start with some bite-sized chunks, right? And build that rigor in the organization. Sorry, go ahead, Alexander.
Yeah, and you bring a great point. I mean, basically, what you say is that we need a good baseline. It is Brad saying that we have the tools, but it has to be formally placed and properly placed. You know, I'm recently an ISO guy now, ISO 27001. But thing is that that's bringing some formality in the process and proper documentation, which is somehow needed to define the boundaries and requirements for implementing proper access control. Because you need, zero trust means also that you need to be able to audit the access before, because you cannot strengthen the controls if you have not the base in place. So we have the tools, as Brad was saying, but is it properly managed? Because zero trust is also a big requirement on clean governance and clean workflows and clean documentation. So basically, I say maybe zero trust is kind of the next step when you did everything right. And you want, to lock things up, then there are tools, but they will go on top of a clean base. We cannot throw a zero trust tool at a crappy base. I mean, if that people, I mean, don't get it. And it's always, we always say that back to the basics. Well,
we do a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's hard not to do it. I'm just saying there's work to be done, and you need to do it properly if you really want to reap the results.
I think that's been one of the challenges, and then I'll if I have a second to do a little bit of a soliloquy on IAM.
Go ahead.
But one of the challenges we have is, we just defended someone against a log4j reflective access in memory. They walk to the machine and try to encrypt or whatever. It was all automated using a whole bunch of fancy footwork, cryptography analysis, and everything else. And then the vendor or whomever is back to the basics, and I'm like, oh man, they're doing password reset. And I just watched this allegedly nation state level attack happen using all this fancy footwork, and I'm like, the journey, it's you're flying paper airplanes and these guys are shooting rockets, and so and they're not even that good, So on IAM, there's a couple trends that we've seen on the threat intelligence side. Because we position ourselves last man standing, last person standing, right? That hardened ICBM silo. So we get to see a lot of the crazy stuff happening, right? And one of the things we're seeing is that our telemetry almost always has co-opted user session access. So Alexandre, to your point, we're not seeing any more admin. It's all Brad, on our telemetry at least, right? So it's all Brad's user has access to, the database, right? And so it's almost we're, when I watch the flow of the encryption, it's almost watching those germ spread videos, those horror Michael Crichton or whatever, if he's still around, where it's it follows the airplane trail to the major hubs, and then from there, and that's kind of what I'm watching happen on the ransomware side, because they're just following the business behaviors of the data there. And we're also kind of victim in that we're seeing OAuth tokens, even for our own agents, getting stolen and replayed. And we've had to adjust and kind of staple on different ways of addressing it, under the hood using various means. And I'm thinking, to the point about auditing, so yes, it seems like the new front is they have adapted to the level of IAM adoption, even if to your guys' point, they don't know they're doing it, but they have it, the OAuth tokens, the temporary tokens and everything. And we're watching it, and that's become this hidden battlefield, this Cold War where no one, it's a Pixar movies where they have this huge explosion, then they zoom out and really it's two ants fighting, and no one sees it happening, and it reminds me of that. I'm watching these things happen, and I'm just this is so far beyond what I can communicate to my client, because some of them are a butcher or something, and there are folks that are, but that's that. I guess my question to now that my soliloquy is done, maybe a diatribe. I don't know. That might have switched over.
It was good. It
switched over to anger. I don't know.
It could be either. It could be either.
How do you? I mean, what do you guys see as the next steps there? Because the auditing of that, since we know they're co-opting access, and they're co-opting OAuth tokens and things like that. What do you guys see as like the solution to that in terms of monitoring or to respond and things like that?
Well,
my diatribe's over.
Yeah, it's just throw that grenade out there. You know what
Yeah,
I'm saying?
yeah.
yeah. Well, I'll jump on that, because back to the things. The first thing will be on my end, reducing the attack surface, because what you bring is visibility of something people ignore. They are not aware, and I'm always like connected equal hacked. But the fact is that people don't realize what's happening under hood, as you said. There is a lot of attempt nonstop and attempt to exploit vulnerabilities. Some 0 days. So 0 days, for people who don't know, it's a vulnerability that has no fix and is not known yet, but it's already out there, and attackers use them. So that means that you can be abused and you don't know it. Yeah. So to mitigate that stuff, this is about risk reduction. Risk reduction comes on my end from reducing the attack surface on a way. And then speaking about zero trust, what remain on the attack surface that you had to identify, because you need to know your risks. Once you identify them, you can enforce the control through the zero trust concepts, data plane and control plane. So making sure that what goes through it is actually under scrutiny by the control access. And this has to be enforced. But you must to control the doors and know what are the paths and what's your attack surface. So zero trust, yes, but it's like the cherry on the cake. Maybe it's the cream on top of the cherry. I don't know where you put this cherry on top of it.
Yes.
Yeah, but somehow at the very end of it. So,
but Ron,
so
it's
zero
a team thing. We wouldn't get it,
But literally, there's two things at play, I guess. One is, and you joked about it before, Alexander, and somebody put it in the chat about, well, you're sitting in the cloud, and how can you trust the cloud? Well, there will never be full zero trust, right? So if you decide to do business with Amazon or GCP or Azure or whatever, there is a degree of trust that you have with them. It may not be zero. It's something, and you're shaking. But there's everybody on the call has some. Well, I won't say I do, but a lot of people have services with those folks. So it's making sure that saying zero trust is easy to say, but there's some stuff that you're taking for granted, right? Whether you're doing business with Salesforce or whoever, QuickBooks, those are all services your companies are using. Right.
Well, and to jump on that, it's this is, and we've had the conversation before about third parties, right? Everybody's got third parties, right? If you have an email account from Yahoo, Gmail, God forbid AOL, you have a third party. I knew that was for you, Alex. I figured you liked that one, right? But again, so there's that. So you have a third party. So what is your third party doing? So this goes back to the same conversation we always have, which is you have to know what you've got. You have to understand your assets, and your assets include not only the stuff you have, in the physical premise, but also the stuff that is in the cloud and wherever else it is in the hands of third parties. And then, so to me, when you look at, what Dennis is talking about, when we think about zero trust, right, it becomes a series of levels of maturity. I saw one of the comments that flowed through, on LinkedIn is that, it's a journey. It absolutely is. And, too many organizations out there think that they are going to go from zero, go with me, or zero to zero trust in like that. Right. And I completely agree with Rod. That is not possible. It's just like when we talk about threat intelligence, and you can't just go from no threat intelligence to a magical threat intelligence shop. You have to build small. You start small and you scale up. And a lot of organizations, they are looking for the Staples easy button that they can push, and all of a sudden, bam, there's zero trust enabled. And that's not even a thing, right? And that's the real challenge here.
The cloud say they do.
What?
What? Then the Azure guy say like, we are zero trust something, check the box and that's it.
Yeah.
So we have a challenge where one of we had to change up our OAuth scheme a little bit. Again, back to the product side, and because one of the major OAuth federated ID providers, I won't name them, they have a problem with refresh tokens being revoked prematurely. The only reason why you would revoke a refresh token is because it was compromised, right? So we've had a problem with that. We've kind of changed things around, but and of course, nobody's talking about it, and I don't see them putting out security notices every couple of days. Hey, we have to revoke 25 tokens because of whatever. There's not even like an API call I can make to revoke a token. So this is all internal on their part, and so I'm kind of like there's nonsense going on, and at least someone is catching it somewhere. We're just not sure where, but it's definitely happening. They're getting hold of the key servers, and at least they're suspected to be compromised. Back to the point about the cloud and other hardware, like we can do things like digitally sign application payloads, but that's not going to stop the underlying problem, right?
Yeah. And I think the piece that we didn't mention is kind of the monitoring after the fact, right? So the continual monitoring of the process, the continual monitoring of the network, and ensuring that all the things you set are being adhered to, right? And so it's, as I said, it's not a set it and forget it. It's by no means something that you should abandon. It's stuff that we should all be striving for. It's just making sure we have the right expectations.
Well, and the other piece of that is, and Rod, you really hit on something good there, and Dennis mentioned it as well, is that if we're going to, follow the zero trust model, there's a set of infrastructure there that has to go with it. If we're going to do, like you said, monitoring after the fact, monitoring in fact, right, and monitoring before the fact, right, we have to have the storage to do that. And depending on the size of the enterprise we're talking about here, smaller organizations, that's still a big chunk of thing. If you have a 1 gig fiber connection to your house, you're going to produce, gigabytes and gigabytes of data on a daily basis. Where do you store all of that? How long do you store it, right? What is it, what is it to mean so that you can actually go back and look at the post-mortem of an event like a stolen token, as Dennis mentioned, right? That's another consideration here, that you can slap the ZTA sticker on it and say, bam, it's ZTA. But unless you've actually sat down and wrote, figured out your requirement set to store all of that data, to manage all of that properly, you're going to be sunk, at least in my mind.
Yeah. And catch things like Kerberos replay attacks and all the shit that happens, excuse my language, in the depth of the network, right? Like, yeah. They get into one system in some way, shape, or form, and they do replays until they get in, right? And if you're not watching,
isn't that the job of the NSA, to keep the track of every traffic data stuff? No, I didn't get it right.
Send you an alert at 3 a.m.
Oh my gosh, that's great.
They love me, I know.
Oh my goodness. Well, so I want to throw something out there. So think about this, right? So what's interesting is Dennis brought up a movie. What was the movie you referenced, Dennis?
Ooh,
that's hard. He references a lot of movies.
I know he does.
No.
Right, yeah, and it was a good one too, and I was going to jump on it. But so I want to throw a movie reference out there. When we look at what's happening in the space today, what's amazing to me is, we still find, FTP servers live on the internet. We still find, open SMTP relays. We still find, you name it, exposed ports galore, right? And you're just asking for, somebody to poke at that and see if they can, worm their way in. And so this summer, apparently, there's another Jurassic Park movie, right? Because Lord knows we haven't learned from the first 5 movies that cloning dinosaurs is a good idea. Okay. And every single time it just goes south, right? It's just bad, right? And so, but this is where we find ourselves. It's like that's why I think like zero trust is one of those things that people are looking at, is because they're asking themselves, hey, we keep doing the same stuff over and over again. And we keep having the same, I talk with my graduate students all the time. It's like, we keep having the same problems because we haven't fixed the problems, and zero trust is a methodology to get us to better, but it's never going to be, just like everything else we talk about, it's not going to be a perfect solution. There's going to be gaps. It's not like you can magically make your IoT, right? Your IoT devices in your environments, and integrate them into zero trust. right? That's going to be a gap area for some time, right? And so we have to consider all of those different areas, I think, when we look at this. And zero trust is, again, one of the tools in the kit bag that can help us to get from, continuing to do Jurassic Park over and over again to something hopefully better in the long run.
Yeah, and you couple that with subnetting properly and isolation of services and zero levels of access, etc., and then you start getting into a place where you're the company that they drive by, right? They don't try to get into, they drive by, and you just got to keep iterating on that.
Well, that's when, Rod, you have a press release and you have some CTO say, "Thank goodness for our Binford 7000 patch code." We would have been hoed. And then they're just on this like, there's a ticking time bomb,
Oh. I didn't know Binford was in the cyberspace business. Right. For those of you that don't know, that's a home improvement joke. That's where Dennis was going there, and that's awesome for those of us that watch that show.
Yeah. So I was reading one of the myths, and some of the myths are like zero trust impedes user experience, and it implies you don't trust your employees, and a bunch of stuff like that. And I'd love to get you guys to weigh in on that.
That's the real thing. We cannot trust humans. They all sell that.
So you're saying we should impede their access? Is that what you're saying?
No access for humans. You remove the human. Wait. I mean, I say it all the time. Technology used to be designed to be serving humans and helping us. Now humans are blocking technology from properly evolving. Let the robot take over. No, not yet. No, okay, right.
They might be doing a podcast in a second.
I think part of that, Rod, goes back to on our telemetry, we're not seeing like hackerlols.exe anymore. We're seeing legitimate privileged applications, and the ransomware and the data theft is executing on programs that, of course, it's like a wolf in sheep's clothing because of process injection or whatever else going on. Yeah. But we do have clients we see where it's like this. Their strategy is like an unsigned, PowerShell script. That just kind of has unfettered access to everything, and that's kind of like, wow, that's special. But we do see a whole bunch of these like SharePoint.exe things like that are running highly privileged. Look at Log4j. That was a great example of what we were seeing was highly privileged application. It already should be accessing the credit card database, so zero trust IAM doesn't really hold up there, right? Because they're going to flow just like that flight from the zombie movie, the flight from, I don't know, South Korea to New York City to infect New York City, right? It's just normal business, and only you can't really tell who. So I try to tell people, they're like, well, was that the employee or not? And I'm like, I think you've got to call them. I don't see any solution. There's no technical way out of this. Yeah, call them and see if they're really on vacation, and that's the only way. We have seen before too where everyone thinks that like geo filtering, it blocks out noise, but like I've watched on many occasions where they'll actually just go to use cloud technology. They'll find a less offensive and obvious place to pivot their attack from. And then I'm stuck trying to convince a client that like all attacks don't come from KGB headquarters. There is a data center in St. Louis and they pivoted right through there,
Where they've hacked a bunch of home modems, which they've done.
The Alexandre cloud is useful. When you don't have an orphanage you can proxy through, you can go through the cloud,
With no
criminals, they love the cloud, and the cloud love crime money too. They don't care. Yeah. So, and you raise a good point as well, because the whole system, you see these issues at the binary stage that is connected to the user, and when we see the cloud, because I was blaming Azure stack, but Azure come with decent technology. You have the PIM called Privilege Identity Management, with a lot of security controls where a manager can actually be required to allow a task to be achieved by a user and actually could control all that thing. So this is part of the PIM of Azure. So they have a stack allowing to do that. But the issue I have is that these tools only connect to just a few parts of the service. It doesn't go in a holistic approach. And the organization is not focused just on the covert side of things. So when we speak zero trust, Azure on the side or other cloud provider, but zero trust concept is to cover the whole infrastructure and your whole attack surface. So one provider with its own insider cooking of zero trust is not going to achieve the results that we expect of the implementation. So we need interoperability between the systems, and we need something more open with a more wide view. Because
we need API access. It shouldn't just be locked down to, and then that's the whole thing of these fighting cloud providers of right. They don't want multi-cloud, so they don't give you API access to be able to do those things, and not give you the ability to actually obfuscate away from what they do, because obviously they want to lock you in. But at the end of the day, I mean, you do need it, and we should all be multi-cloud. We should not be one-armed in any way, shape, or form.
Oh, I agree. Like, I mean, we should not forget that cybersecurity is about CIA, and in CIA you have availability. And when one big cloud provider falls down, well, we do not deliver the service. But when we lose the service, we also lose the visibility, the audit, and basically we also break the integrity of the security side of things. Because, what's still running, what's not running? Do the security controls still run when the service is not available? That we have no idea about. When it goes in the dark, what happened behind? That we have no idea about. So I agree with the multi-cloud, and also one of the principles, which is not clearly defined in the zero trust, is the overlapping security control, and that's another base. What's watching on Dennis? You want to jump on that? The overlapping control?
Yeah, I mean, it just reminds some of our sprint reviews, for our development. So something that we've seen is the attackers will firewall off the cloud analytics side, the remote side. So the SIM, or really the analytics server behind the SIM, can never really make the decision of whether something is bad or not. So internally, on our endpoint, we had to be like, okay, well, we have to survive and make a decision even when there's no network left. Even when, for whatever reason, our endpoint has been firewalled off, and that's become a challenge, right? Because now I think I read like 80% of the EDRs out there, and that word of fill in your marketing letter there, right? But like XDR, whatever, but like they require the cloud analytic access for that correlation, and so without naming any names, what they'll do is they'll just firewall off that analytic engine, and they'll firewall off the SIM and the SOC sometimes. And so the first time that you've gone down, sometimes we've seen is they'll get a phone call from there, or in our case, we'll all of a sudden get this like burst of alerts from like 6 hours ago when they finally flipped the switch on the network card or whatever, and then they're just like, how come I didn't know about this? I'm like, well, I think your network was down. It was selectively down, So for the zero trust, I don't know a way around that, right? Because to like, the point about like the ticket granting tickets and all that correlation and the geofencing, that you can't do that on an endpoint easily. You need that big view. There's no way around it, right? And so it's so vital.
And I would say conceptually, when you really think about that, right? I mean, Dennis, you're talking about being worried about the kernel, but when you step back a level and you have an attacker that looks to isolate, cloud analytics, looks to isolate the connection points. Well, guess what they're doing? That's like a rootkit at scale, right? That's basically a network rootkit, right? In delivery, and so. That is something that, you see it, again, we're going to do movie references today. It was like, was it National Treasure with Nicolas Cage, where they're getting in to like steal the Declaration of Independence because there's some map on the back of it or whatever, right? Well, how they replay the actual, they actually, do the replay of the security camera. Well, guess what? This is a thing, right? Attackers are very savvy in looking at this. And one of the things when I think about zero trust, when playing an attacker on TV, if you will, doing pen testing and hunting and things like that. If I'm going to go after something in an environment that is running zero trust, I'm going after the policy engine, right? I'm going to go in there. That's where I want to go, right? Because again, just like everything else, right? When we put something in and say everything's going to go through that single point, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying this is one of the flaws that we see here. Is if I'm going to say everything's going to go through the policy engine and the policy administrator, well, guess what? That's where I'm going. I'm going to go right there, and I'm going to give myself excellent access as a bad guy, so I can do what I need to do in the environment. But again, the good news here is it gets harder and harder, because now I have to have the ID token, right? I have to have the ID card or the PKI token, whatever it is I need, right? I have to have the gate in. And so the gate in is getting harder. But once I'm in, I'm going after the policy engine, because that's what we've seen. We've seen it with attacks on like group policy objects and delivery of ransomware and malware that way. I mean, there's many ways. Once you get to the central point in any of these architectures, that's where you can do the most damage.
And with our development, we try to be, well, we have to be predictive, because it can take, it can take 18 months to develop a capability that's kind of like has the survivability, the resilience, and the speed on-prem, on edge, right, to work, right? And there's some things we see, and we've learned that like we have a pretty accurate measurement of market adoption based on if the hackers have to overcome it. And there's been some things we've built, for instance, network segmentation. We knew they had code, around for doing Active Directory task enumeration and stuff like that. To your point, to just have a policy go out, say, hey, everyone run this at midnight, and on Boxing Day or whatever, then we built this fancy analytic, and then it just wasn't used. And we were just like, that's because people have flat networks. When it stops being flat, so to the point, I'm really happy. This is my happy face to see like that. Our telemetry moved from hackerlols.exe to SharePoint.exe or whatever else, because I'm happy about it, because that means there's enough federated identity out there, and there's enough going on that, to your point, Brad, about they're moving past. They're getting to the point of seeing, I have to do this thing to bypass federated ID, to bypass IAM. Now they bypass it, but that's a big step. You just knocked out some of the low hanging fruit there, which is it's a journey to there's a bunch of what do you want to call it, like Wayne Gretzky quotes about the puck and everything else. It
used to be easier when we were all on prem and didn't have all the COVID work from home, and we could profile users, and we knew Fred only came on between 9 and 5 and was rarely on at night, but it's become harder. So I mean, in the old days, when you talk about something going offline, right, because it's been firewalled off, you had a chance of catching it. But now it's very hard, because people are on at all different hours, right? Like I'm working from home, right? I take my dog for a walk, and I come back and I start working at 5 till 7 because I took my dog for a walk for 2 hours. And that profiling is a lot harder. And I hate talking about AI, but the whole machine learning and correlation side was easier when people worked a 9 to 5, right? And it has changed. So it's really difficult to know that, yes, Dennis's computer had been firewalled off because Dennis could have just shut down for the day and it happened, right? And he's going to come back on at 9. And it makes it a lot harder. And so that piece is difficult. I haven't seen anybody come up with a solution that's like really meaningful, other than some kind of last minute having some kind of monitor that sees, oh, Windows Firewall has been shut down. Oh, like that would be the only thing that could possibly help, but I haven't seen anybody with anything like that yet.
And that's only the side that we control, because now with all the third party, what remains under our control, the workstations, let's say, and some in-house stuff or some proprietary dedicated clouds, all the external services that we run, I mean, we should go through the due diligence of making sure that the baseline of security applying in these services is working well. And as Dennis was speaking about telemetry and data collection, will these services provide the needed data to feed the intelligence on our side to make sure we can work with correlation? Because after all, Rod, you spoke about behavior analytics. Like we look for anomalies now through the AI and ML, but that's not working if the third-party services are not providing the insight to run these analysis. And to be honest, there is no standard right now. I mean, if you get a Salesforce and you get a Facebook account for a corporation and you got some payroll stuff, and they barely provide the needed intelligence feed to work with the correlation. Yeah, if you get this single sign-on, okay, fine, you're gonna get the authentication feed from the authentication platform, so or Auth0 or whatever, if you use Azure ID or AD or whatever, but that's it. In regard to the behavior, the advanced security, that's we fall back on the shared security, shared responsibility model of the cloud. If you use a SaaS and you use infrastructure as a service on the other side, how can you connect the security posture together? And that there is a big gap today into that, because and there is a transfer of risk, but we know we cannot transfer 100% of responsibility. So if we want a full governance and we want the audit capability, right now the providers say, oh, we keep an audit trail of everything, but we cannot merge the data easily in a global SIEM or online SIEM, because now the SIEM on-premise, I think it's dead and it's just as a service. And then is the solution, telemetry stuff, data collection, which is critical, is not available everywhere. So what's the point of being zero trust on one end, but having a white, like a low list, a white list in the pipe to something that's not matching the security requirement? So, and right now, when we speak ISO certification, whatever, we speak about scope. And scope can be translated that, no, we don't want to speak about anything outside of that because it's too scary. Something like that.
Or if it's not in the scope and you ignore it, it doesn't exist, right? But so I have a question for Dennis, though, when we think about this. So when we think about, the scope and scale here, Dennis, I mean, what is like the recommendation when we think about zero trust? You just say, I'm going to deploy, I'm going to build up and scale up to zero trust, and it's that I think what people are going to get stuck on is, the inspect and monitor piece, because from an audit perspective, that's where we want to go back and look and do the forensics and do the auditing and everything like that. So, I mean, what's like the standard? Is it 3 days? Is it 5 days, 7 days of storage of all that stuff, right? And then what does that equivalent to, or what is the equivalent to when we think about sort of, how much storage do you need? And God forbid we put it in the cloud, but, if you're going to build like your own sort of on-premise capability to, hold all of that stuff, obviously you're not going to keep it forever, because there's a large expense to, storing that kind of data.
Yeah, so I guess there's a couple items here. So the first is that the response time is customer and also jurisdictionally like kind of mandated, right? So there's like overlapping like Venn diagrams of like, oh look, I'm in Tennessee, and therefore like I have 3 days. I don't know. Oh wait, no, I have a federal contract. Therefore now it's like 24 hours. I'm supposed to somehow discover and prosecute the attacker, as if it's like a TV show, and so now
Wait, you're way in saying CSI Cyber isn't really never mind.
It's just like NCIS with the two guys on the one, or it was like the female character and the male character on the same keyboard, fighting back to the hacker, So I don't know how that works, but so we've had to take an angle of so we did a bunch of math on some of the defenses we've made, and we realized that like the whole enterprise would have gone down at under 1 minute, based on they were using Active Directory to spawn up like 75 machines at once. Wow. And each one of those would spawn out 50 samples of ransomware. And so it's like a SETI at home, only like if Satan was in charge, like it's like, it wasn't the good SETI at home, and so we're like, okay, so we have 1 minute, so yeah, so we have so basically we have we have to have like this automated kind of response, right? Because there's no way a person is ever going to respond to that, right? And then we have this like threat intel feed. And it seems like we have to kind of get back to that, where there is some level of automation, because when the game is you have 1 minute, there's not time for that 3 day kind of like threat hunting. The data's there, but so full disclosure, like Rod has some customers that use our product that Rod is giving expertise on, and we've even had challenges where in the kernel we're like doing some cryptographic validation using the Windows crypto API, and we have to go from our driver out to the service. That's how deep we are. We have to go out to the service where the rest of the programs live and say, hey, is this like crypto real? Can you like do some math on that? Well, to the point about we can't wait. With the Windows upgrades, sometimes Windows takes too long to respond. And so there's latency, and going back down to where we are, same machine, right? This isn't even like using network, right? Same machine. And sometimes we have to make a decision without getting that feedback on the information, because it's kind of like, well, I don't know. It's like our favorite, scenario where there's ICBMs inbound from Russia, and we're like, well, I guess we better make a decision because we're not going to be here in an hour, which is a horrible place to be. Please don't take that as like I want to see that happen, right? Like War Games was an awesome movie, like just don't play, but like but to the point we have to make it, and I think we're going to see more of that as more people catch on that like we don't have days. We have to make some decisions based on the information we have, especially if there are gaps in the logs. Like Alexandre is like doing log analysis on OAuth stuff, and there was like a gap. Look at log4j. The biggest evidence was there was a gap in the logs. Scary as heck, but like sometimes that's what we have to do to kind of move forward. Anyway, so that's my soliloquy. It started peaceful. It kind of went into a rant. But.
So what's the algorithm and the decision-making process when there is no data? Is it like Russian roulette style? I kill the process, random?
Nice. Yeah, we have like a triage, but I think that's what it's going to have to be, where it's, you just keep on stacking on variables, and then but that's ML already, right? You have an 80% chance of being right. It reminds me of like getting takeout for the family. Like I have a probability of getting the order right. It's not 100%,
Yeah, I mean, in terms of data, the minimum is like month over month, right? You need to be able to compare at least month over month. The ultimate is year over year, right? Because then you get into all the cyclical stuff, right? So there's Christmas. What happened? So if you don't have the previous year and December comes and it's Christmas time and you alarm out like crazy because traffic dropped. Well, it's Christmas or it's Boxing Day or so there's lots of tricks to work through that from an ML perspective. But at least having day over day, month over month data, so at least 2 months data is helpful to see trends in traffic. If you take out all the holidays and all the other shit, if you're going to look at traffic by person, et cetera, and start profiling people, they tend to have similar, on a day-to-day basis, they tend to have similar profiles. You have the odd day where your boss gave you a whole new project, whatever, and all of a sudden you're generating way more inbound or outbound data than you would have normally. But you can trend that, and yeah, you may alert on some anomalies, but there's ways of getting through that. But at least, as I said, day over day, month over month data is the place to start. Is your lowest. If you got a huge organization with tons of traffic, that could be gigs of data, or if you're like a 3-man organization or a 3-woman organization, it could be megs of data, right? It really depends on the size of the organization, and there's tools to size that. But you really do need to have those comparisons to know what's going. If not, you never know what good looks like, right?
Yeah, it's very right, and you bring a point that I've seen when we meet SMBs that are victim of an incident, and where I've been on an incident response team, and they have no log, no SIEMs, no track, no audit. And so finally, the only log that we have is what you mentioned. It's the gap in the traffic. And so to know how much data has been stolen, we go at the ISP and pull the statistic of inbound and outbound data. And we can just assess from the previous month's data, the gap between the potential incident date start. And this is allowing us to roughly assess the amount of data that went out between with the gap between the previous months. And because when there is nothing, and they want to know, how much has been stolen. Well, you can just roughly.
I think you're supposed to change vendors until you find the best number, right? You just keep on.
Well, but I mean that's like one of the big points of the zero trust architecture is that there is significant emphasis placed on logging.
Yes.
Logging the activity, logging all the identity management stuff, all of that, and to Alex's point, it is spot on. If you go into an organization and they have no logs, you have nothing. right? And you can't answer the question. You could say, they can ask you all the time. Well, but we want you to look at the SIM, but they don't have a SIM, or they don't gonculate logs. They don't even do any logging at all. They don't. Maybe they have NetFlow, maybe they don't. Who knows, right? And if there's none of that, right, it's very, very difficult to actually get to root cause and to be able to support a solid post-mortem. And so that's one of the things I actually really do like about Zero Trust, is that it is intentional in, bringing in and tracking all of that stuff based on what, in theory, from an identity management perspective, you're authorized to do.
That's one of our biggest. Oh, sorry, Rod.
And I was just gonna say, when you have zero retention, we can't help you.
So one of our biggest challenges is we started getting customers who, and this is, I'm excited about it. So this is where they said, look, Dennis, we love your cloud. We love that you have everything up in Amazon, whatever, great. We don't trust it. I know. Well, it's the legacy investment of tech to get things up going quickly, and then go back and say, okay, it's time to just. And we did everything we could to make it, encrypted VMs and everything. But regardless. So we have this new Kubernetes product, right, that we haven't fielded yet to a customer, right? But we have. We just got it done 2 weeks ago, right? And done is always with a big asterisk, because in products you're never done, right? Especially in cyber. So and now they're like, oh great, we can put it right next to our AD. And I'm like, well, in every single instance where I go in afterwards, because they put us in after the attack, AD was popped. We couldn't really email them because in some cases they would even block, they would send our emails right to spam, so that we had to talk over Gmail or something, which is a nightmare, And so it's like, okay, so now I have a new problem, which is I'm out of the cloud, 3 cheers, right? But now I'm right next to the place. Yes. So I'm like, so are they going to compromise my stuff? Get onto the Kubernetes cluster and then compromise my machines and just delete the logs inside. And we do have root cause analysis kind of stuff in there. Let's say hop around processes and all kind of cool stuff. But now it's all right for the taking if it's on-prem, right? And so now what do you do? And that's not a rhetorical question. That is not an answer I have yet beyond, hey, have you thought about maybe putting it somewhere else? It's Mother May I, it's like Anyway, so I'd love to hear what your guys' thoughts are on having SIMs and enclaves and things like that in terms of your log management.
It's native. Go ahead, Brad. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, you have to have it, so that's a given, right? But just like everything else, right? Any tool in your environment, you need to defend it, just like everything else, right? So if you have a SIM, right, to me, when you that's one of the things that's one of the keys to your kingdom at that point, because it houses all of the logs that you need to potentially catch the bad guys, right? And so sometimes organizations don't think about it that way, but they should. They should say that is an important asset to me. I'm going to defend it, protect it, and pay attention to what's happening to it. Just for what it's worth.
So I mean, if you're Kubernetes or Docker or whatever, at least you're immutable. So that's helpful.
That is helpful. Ish, but it's helpful.
It's helpful-ish. And it really comes down to least access and all those types of things, right? Is anything infinitely secure? No, it's not. So there's always ways to get in and do something nefarious if you really want to. But it's really making sure that one, you didn't kind of, if you were Docker, you didn't pull some image from God knows where and never checked it for which I don't think you would ever do, Dennis. So it's just
your image.ru.cn.org.
It was there. It was already built. So
Those repos are totally trustworthy.
There is a cloud repository. Cloud is safe. What are you saying?
That was the worst when we had some phone calls from the ransomware developers at various points, and you have to be cagey, whatever, and then once they start naming functions that are inside your source code, because they read it, and the names aren't right, but they'll name it based on the functionality, IDA Pro, and you're just like, the game is up. There's no, they've already read all of my code. They have it up in Ghidra, so.
And we've talked about it. I mean, I came from the gaming industry, and that was a big thing, right? People reverse engineer your code. People read it out of memory. They know what registers to fluff if they want to get in game, and so people complain about games not playing on Linux, it's because all the cheating stuff had to go in to stop people from doing all the stuff that they were doing, right? And it's that game has been in existence for a very long time. But yeah, long and short, if you're on-prem, now you have to trust the people who are on-prem as well too, physically, right? And we all know you can't trust anybody, to be honest. So it's you've opened up yourself to that, but larger companies want to know that they have the baby beside them, and so it's that balance of giving them what they want and protecting it the best they can, and then it comes down to just monitoring the hell out of it.
Yeah. Well, you can have security process for the people as well, background check and all. I mean, the organization should have it as well. So, yeah. Sorry for.
Cool. No worries. So I think we're almost at, we crossed over the hour point, Alex. I think that was a wide-ranging conversation. I think we should probably begin our wrap-ups.
I agree. It's actually 1 hour something, and people must be tired of listening to us. But I think it was very, very, very insightful. I like the discussion. Dennis, I'm thankful for what you bring because, real fact from the trenches. And what you see it's amazing because we don't see many specialists and skilled people sharing about what they see. And to me, it's incredibly valuable because it should allow people to understand the kind of threat we face. Like a lot of people just ignore it. I don't know if they will listen to or blah, blah, blah. But at least, I hope like just a few will get it. And this one maybe will spread the word. And hopefully it will make a difference for some. So thank you for spending time and helping and sharing. I think it's a great stuff. Brad?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree, Dennis. We appreciate your time today. It was awesome. I always learn something when you're on our conversations because there's always interesting things out there and movie references. So that's good.
Yes.
But I'll tell you, one of the things that I want to just leave the audience with is that Zero Trust is another tool in the kit bag. Right? It's not going to solve all the problems, but it's something that you, as a pro out there, you're going to run into it, and so you probably ought to read up on it and get a little bit of familiarity with it, and understand that it is a model that allows you to get better. But it's not going to replace VPNs. It's not going to replace the standard tooling that you already have. It is going to come alongside that and basically allow you to map and better understand what you're actually doing in your environment, and hopefully help you figure out a way to close some of those gaps. Rod?
100%. It's not a panacea, and by no means is anybody on this panel saying that you shouldn't do it. What you should do is build your environment properly, have least access privileges, monitor the hell out of it, and make sure you know what good looks like, right? And then you can layer Zero Trust on top of it. We always talk about security in layers, so layered security is still key. Subnetting, all those types of things are all things that we need to do at the end of the day. And we did this panel and it came about because there's so much noise. And the thing that we find a lot is vendors who are saying things that aren't true and getting people to buy into a product and then getting left in a lurch because, you bought it because you thought it was a silver bullet and you didn't realize you had to do a mountain of work to make it work the way it was supposed to. And it kind of sits on a shelf or it's partially implemented, etc. It's really us shining light saying, do it. You should do it. It's a good thing to do. Do it in bite-sized pieces so that you can get it done properly. So start with system administrators and then go to network engineering and go to finance and whatever, so that you can be successful at it. And then by the time you're done and as long as you're committed to it, you're going to be in a better place than you were. And I think everybody, that's all we wanted to say was, don't fall for the marketing speak, but also don't walk away from Zero Trust. Just set your expectations, put the time in, and do it right.
Now, I would love to see, as like an outcome, even though, for like the pipe dream possibly, I would love to see like a genre-oriented assessment capability of a product's implementation of Zero Trust,
Yes.
just like we have for other things. A network products have a different scope than an endpoint security product, than a database, but I would love to have some kind of criteria to say, questions to ask your vendor, and then, some way of assessing So Alexandre, if you can have like next week for me, maybe talk to your NIST friends, that would be super helpful. So yeah.
And I forgot to thank Dennis. Dennis, it's always a pleasure chatting with you, dude. I mean, you got so much knowledge, hands on the keyboard knowledge in the game on ransomware that having you on and getting your viewpoint it's immensely important.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you. And I think the view that we're when you say ransomware, that's not step one. That's like step 10. So automatically, my engineers and I are in the world of zero trust because we're landing on Omaha Beach, like 6 hours after the invasion, right? And it's just like a mess, and so it's a good place to be and to share some insights from that angle, even though we're not really marketing ourselves as a zero trust. It's more like about resilient, so I appreciate your time, guys, really.
Awesome.
And hearing your insights was great.
Awesome.
Thank you. So
thanks, Alex.
that's a wrap.
That's a wrap. We'll see everybody next time.
Thank you all.
Yep.
Yes. Have a good day all.
Bye.
Bye.